Yes. Very
Okay.
good.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. And thank you very much for hanging on there with this last talk. So I'd like to start by thanking the organizers, of course, for this very nice workshop. And I apologize for not having been there for part of it. Was overlapping with another workshop. I'd also like to thank my collaborators from Imperial and from all over the world who have done lots of contributions to what I'm going to be talking about. It'll be based mainly on those papers there, plus some other papers are to appear, hopefully, in a not too distant future. So let me start with some introductions, although I think these are probably irrelevant for this audience. But just to put things back into context, we'd like to understand within the context of effective field theories, we have our low energy phenomenology where we build our castles, the castles in the sky, and we'd like to understand which one of those are embeddable within a consistent high energy completion. And just to give you an example, this is something Lavinia has already mentioned before. If I'm just interested as an example on the effective field theory for dark energy, these are typical type of models that people have been considering in the past. And I'm trying to be a little bit provocative there in showing how many different examples they are. This is a kind of a bubble, and not the same type of bubbles, although almost the same type of bubbles as Lavinia showed earlier, that are presented in a summer school in 2008. So now, I guess, 13 years ago. And then if I scale down to the different type of models that have come up in the literature since then, there's a lot more multitude of models that come in, and this is really not finite. This is highly biased type of models that people have been considered in the literature. Biased because I'm writing them down. There's a lot of other very interesting models that people have considered. And so creativity in determining a consistent effective field theories that can describe the phenomenology of our low energy world, whether you're interested in dark energy or some other type of phenomenology, is definitely not lacking. So when I go back to this picture, really it's not so much that we have a high energy world and then we want to connect to our low energy effective field theory, and a beautiful picture there is really there's a whole competition of different models, and we need to find some segregation procedure in determining which one of these castles is probably the closest to our representation of what we want to call nature or reality, or however you want to call it. And of course, we could let in principle observational data discriminate between these various type of low energy effective field theories. They are doing amazingly good jobs, and sometimes I have slides presenting how well they're doing in segregating between different models. But for the purpose of this talk, we know that there's various types of as well theoretical consistency constraints, and Lavinia described all of them extremely well in her talk. I'm just gonna focus on the ones of positivity constraints, which are very complementary to the Swampland program. So I'll focus on positivity constraints, possibly because they may be not as well known in that community, and they lead to very complementary constraints, and particularly in when I try to relate it to the weak gravity conjecture. What I have to say about the positivity constraints is that they are present even in the absence of gravity, even if you don't know, want to embed your theory within a theory of quantum gravity. So the question I like to address, and this is the question we all like to address in here, is within a low energy gravitational effective field theory, what the constraints are, not necessarily from an embedding within string theory, but from an embedding within a standard high energy completion. And I'll be very specific in the type of assumption that I'm imposing on myself in determining these so-called positivity bounds. So it's a little bit simpler to start with a non-gravitational effective field theory, because then the connection is very clear. And the aim of today, at least for my talk, is to show how, and it's not going to come as any surprise to everyone, but to show how much subtle bounds are as soon as we're dealing with a gravitational setup. So let me start with a non-gravitational effective field theory. And beyond this embedding in a Wilsonian sense and in a weak coupling sense, I'm going to impose on myself that my completion has to satisfy unitarity, Lorentz invariance, causality, and locality. So it depends as well a little bit on the audience, but most people, we consider those assumptions as perfectly natural and would be very reticent in breaking any of those conditions, at least when we're not dealing with a gravitational setup. So when we have our high energy completion dealing with those type of assumption, we can derive a set of positivity bounds, which I'll roughly scan through in a cartoon picture. And from those positivity bounds is a requirement related to subluminarity, which we talked a little bit, we heard a little bit about earlier today. And there's a really one-to-one correspondence in models which don't satisfy, that are not gravitational between the subluminarity of the fields at low energy and the requirement of causality and the positivity bounds. So to see this connection for non-gravitational effective field theory, the easiest way to do it is to look at the 2-2 scattering amplitude within our low energy effective field theory. I'll be working in the Mandelson variables. So S is the center of mass energy square. And I'm gonna continue it in the complex S plane. Now, our low energy effective field theory, whatever you want it to be for dark energy, even if you want to think of it for inflation or whatever else you want it to be, will have some finite region of validity, if it's not already a quantum theory of everything. And then you want to relate what's going on within this low energy effective field theory with some requirements that you impose on yourself within the high energy completion. And of course, there's a decoupling of scale between what's going on at very high energy and what's going on at low energy. And there may be many different layers of physics that go on between your low energy effective field theory and ultimately your high energy completion. So clearly, you should remain relatively agnostic on the precise details of your high energy completion to understand what's going on for your phenomenology at low energy. However, there's a connection between what's going on or some of the assumptions that you have to impose on yourself at high energy and what's going on at low energy, which is coming from causality. And in this case, it is encoded through the requirement of analyticity. More precisely, the statement of causality, at least for a non-gravitational theory, imposes that your scattering amplitude has to be analytic in the complex S-plane everywhere aside from the real axis where it has a branch cut and some poles. And this is in the first Rham sheet. We can talk about that later if you want to. But there's a direct connection there between causality and analyticity. And this is precisely what relates what's going on at high energy to what's going on at low energy. Now, with the requirement of causality, plus that of unitarity and Lorentz invariance, I'm sorry, I don't know what happened to this picture here. It looks a little bit funny, but hopefully there's not too much of an issue. So we all know about unitarity, and embedded within the requirement of the optical theorem, it tells you that the imaginary part of the amplitude has to be positive in the physical region. So the imaginary part of the amplitude has to be positive in here. That actually corresponds to the discontinuity of the amplitude. And using Lorentz invariance, and particularly crossing symmetry, that tells you that you can also connect it to the imaginary part of the amplitude on the left branch cut. And so the imaginary part of the discontinuity of the amplitude has to be positive here and positive there. Now, using analyticity, which I said is related to the requirement of causality, you can relate what's going on at low energy, for instance, in here, with what's going on in a Cauchy integration surface. And if you further require locality, which tells you here really what I require is the Froissart band, so the requirement that the amplitude decays fast enough or smaller than S squared when S goes to infinity, then as you send the boundary here of your contour to infinity, the integrand drops out, and you end up with a requirement that has to be satisfied within the regime of validity of the low energy effective field theory. At low energy, you require that the amplitude, no matter how this theory is precisely embedded at high energy, has to be positive. So really, it's a second derivative in here. And that's completely independent to have fields come and complete your theory at high energy. It can be string theory, it can be whatever you want. If you want your high energy completion to satisfy those bounds, then you need to satisfy these positivity bounds at low energy. And that's one of many different bounds. There's actually an infinite number of those bounds. But this is just for illustration purposes. Now you can actually do a little bit more than that because you know what's going on at low energy. And particularly this branch cut here has some contribution from the low energy loops, as well as from the high energy loops. By that I mean from the loops of the high energy fields, the heavy fields, heavy as compared to the regime of validity of your low energy effective field theory. But when you're considering the loops from your light modes, so the contribution to the branch cut here up to a given point, up to the cutoff of your low energy effective field theory, are coming just from loops of your light modes, which are within control in the low energy effective field theory, are therefore computable, they're perfectly perturbative. And so you can do a little bit more than what I mentioned before. You can subtract the contribution from the low energy effective field theory themselves and know that the remainder has to be positive. So this is what we call as improved positivity bounds, which are going to be relevant in what I'm going to be talking about later. Is not only that the derivative of the amplitude has to be positive at low energy in the Mandelstrom region in here, it also has to be larger than the contribution from your light loops. By light loops, I mean the loops that you think are under control within your low energy effective field theory. And what you think is under control in your low energy effective field theory depends on what you think the cutoff of your low energy effective field theory is. And so you can think of this as an equation or an inequality for the cutoff of your effective field theory. Clearly, if you send your cutoff to infinity, you will never be able to satisfy this condition. And that really tells you that your low energy effective field theory has to have a cutoff which is small enough. So this is nothing new there, but it gives you a tool to computing this cutoff for any low energy effective field theory. And I'm not going to go through that in here, but in many models of dark energy that I mentioned before, you can see that imposing these improved positivity bounds tell you that the cutoff of your effective field theory has to actually be much smaller than the scale at which perturbative unitarity breaks down. This is just a feature of these improved positivity bounds. Okay, so this is all very nice in the non-gravitational setup. And in the non-gravitational setup, there's also a connection, which is typically implicit in our head, in everything we do in the non-gravitational world, where we think that subliminality is in one-to-one correspondence with causality, or more likely, we think that superliminality is in one-to-one correspondence with violation of causality. And this is absolutely true in the non-gravitational setup, modulo some effects which I'm not going to talk too much about, but they are really relevant subtleties. Just because if you want causality in a non-gravitational effective field theory, you'll have the notion of improved positivity bounds. And you can show, and I'm going to do that in here, but the improved positivity bounds, this is typically shown at the level of the dispersion relation, is requiring subliminality of the fields at low energy. What I mean by that is really subliminality of low energy phase velocity for any field in a background that may spontaneously break Lorentz invariance. Because of course at high energy, we require Lorentz invariance to be satisfied. So it's just a spontaneous breaking of Lorentz invariance. So this is an example which Gary mentioned before earlier, where we have a P of X theory. I'm just going to consider in the first contributions in here. And we know that this P of X type of effective field theory can be embedded within a partial high energy completion, where this operator can be seen as having as the low energy limit of integrating out some heavy field with mass M. And this can be done as soon as this coefficient alpha squared is real. And positive, sorry, as soon as alpha is real, is positive. So in order to embed this within, with alpha squared being negative, you would need to integrate at a ghost or a tachyon or something quite pathological that wouldn't satisfy the assumption that we impose on ourselves. We can see that this is directly related with the requirement that the second derivative of the amplitude computed within the low energy effective field theory be positive. And then you can do phenomenology with this if you wanted to. You can look at fluctuations on top of a particular background that happens to spontaneously break Lorentz invariance. So here, maybe you do cosmology or whatever you want to do. It doesn't need to be a timeline direction. And you recover that the speed of the field will be subluminal if this alpha squared is positive, if alpha is real, and this is directly related to that. So this is all very nice, but again, it's in the non-gravitational setup. So in the remaining time that I have, I don't know how much more time I have, I want to add gravity, of course. This is what we all want to do. We want to understand how these bounds are applicable in the gravitational setup. And there are many subtleties that occur. I'm going to be talking about one in particular, but just the derivation, even assuming those requirements at high energy, the connection between these requirements and positivity bounds is more murky in the gravitational setup, and the connection between those and subliminality is also more murky in the gravitational setup. This is without accounting for the fact that there may be some extra level of subtleties related in the connection between causality and analyticity, and the level of locality that you may need to impose on yourself for gravitational effective field theory, so for gravitational embedding. Okay, but what I like to talk about is even assuming this completion at high energy, preserving the Froissart bound, this is going to be an assumption. I'm going to assume analyticity. Even within those assumptions, the applicability of the positivity bounds is more subtle in a gravitational effective field theory. And the reason for that is simply because gravity couples to everybody, and it couples to everybody in a way that leads to a non-analyticity contribution or to a pole in the scattering amplitude. So it really doesn't matter too much what you're interested about per se. You may be just interested in scattering some electrons from the standard model or whatever you want to do. Maybe you want to do inflation or dark energy. It really doesn't matter too much. As soon as you embed this theory in a gravitational setup, as you have to do, you're can't prevent from yourself having a gravitational exchange. This is my simple way to draw it. And because you have an exchange of a massless spin 2 particle, that leads to a pole in the amplitude that grows like S squared and precisely saturates the Froissart bound and cannot be removed from the amplitude without having a remainder that would itself violate the Froissart bound. So this is not an issue, for instance, if you are exchanging some massless spin 1 particle, even though you have a pole at t is equal to 0, the pole itself grows like S and can be removed without violating the Froissart bound. In here, this cannot be removed, and it leads to a non-analyticity of the remainder of the amplitude that compromises the applicability of the positivity bounds. So there's been many different avenues in trying to dealing with this, this issue. So let me try for a second, and this has been done in various ways, in saying for a reason or another, let me just ignore that. Let me just ignore that issue, and let me just try to apply the positivity bounds to the remainder of the amplitude. There's many very interesting and promising ways in arguing why this may be a reasonable thing to do. I'm not going to go through those arguments here. Let me just try to see if I could apply positivity bounds to the remainder of the amplitude, just by saying that maybe when I send M-Planck to infinity, this goes to 0, and therefore that's not really an issue. And this, to some extent, is correct, but not if you're really interested in M-Planck corrections to the positivity bounds. Okay, and so to see whether this is something that is conceivable, let's explore those type of bounds in an effective field theory where I know, at the very least, a partial high energy completion. This is simply applying this to QED minimally coupled to gravity. So just in terms of scale, I'm going to consider QED coupled to gravity as a low energy gravitational effective field theory. Of course, if I send the Planck scale to infinity, I can just think of this as my UV completion per se. But as soon as M-Planck is finite, then I know that I'm going to need to have a high energy completion, and this QED minimally coupled to gravity will have to break down at some point. I'm going to call lambda the cutoff of that EFT. It could be as high as M-Planck, but I'm gonna let myself believe that it could in principle be smaller than a Planck scale. And then what we all do in our low energy world is, if you're really thinking of things at very low energy, if you integrate out the electron, you have a low energy effective field theory below the electron mass, which is the gravitational Euler-Heisenberg effective field theory. And you can see that you have corrections in this EFT in the propagation of the photon from the curvature of your manifold, just coming from the fact that, so this is in the low energy effective field theory, you can see this as thinking that as the photon propagates, along its trajectory, it interacts with virtual pairs of electrons, which allows it to feel the curvature along its trajectory. So this is, roughly speaking, what it's telling you. Okay, so if you're just living within your low energy, very low energy effective field theory, this is what I'll consider as my low energy effective field theory, whereas this is my partial UV completion. If you just consider in here and you try to apply the improved positivity bounds, you can do it for any amplitude you want. For instance, you're considering scattering of photons with helicity plus plus goes to plus plus, okay, what you're very interested in. You have contribution coming from the contact terms, and this is really in disguise coming from integration out of the loop of electrons that you would have had you not been working in the low energy effective field theory. So this is in the Euler-Heisenberg low energy EFT. And then you have contribution coming from corrections with gravity, from the Planck scale in here, you have some in there, and you have the infamous T-channel pole, which is present here. This U here scales like S, so this is going like S squared over T as promised. This is the infamous T-channel pole. If we forget about this T-channel pole for a second and we try to apply the improved positive bounds to the remainder, so to this part here, you recover what you would like. Actually, you end up with a statement that this is positive so long as the mass of here, the electron, or the mass of the field that you integrated out, is smaller than the Planck scale, smaller than the charge of that particle in units of Planck scale. And if you can apply this or generalize this type of argument to other type of U1 symmetries, it would be a proof of the weak gravity conjecture, at the very least in its magnetic version. And this is a very nice and, I think, very promising avenue presented by Chang and Rham, for instance, in trying to find a formal proof of the weak gravity conjecture based on these positivity bounds. So just saying that this, you can just see it as a consistency relation coming from causality and unitarity, for instance. So this is definitely true. However, one thing that we know in this low energy effective field theory is that this contribution here is actually coming from loops of the electrons. And so if I don't work in my very low energy effective field theory, but I'm working in my QED minimally coupled to gravity, where I bring back the electron in the game, I don't work, I know exactly how it contributes, I'm allowed actually to subtract out the loops from the electrons because there are known contributions in my EFT. And so if I do that, just resulting with the improved positivity bounds I mentioned before, I can remove these contributions of the loops of the electrons up to a given cutoff. Where the cutoff is, it's up to us to decide. And once again, if you were sending the cutoff to infinity, then clearly that wouldn't be satisfied, but there's a soft spot where you can send the cutoff to be something not too, maybe hopefully not too crazy. And that's until when you are allowed to trust your theory of QED minimally coupled to gravity. So naively, you may say, well, this is probably the Planck scale. Well, it's actually going to be lower than the Planck scale. And the idea is to understand how much lower than the Planck scale it would be within this framework. So here again, if you include the loops or you subtract the loops of the electrons, I'm just going to do dimensional regularization in here, the cutoff enters and you end up with a bound. Again, I'm not going to bore you with the details, but in order for these improved positivity bounds to be satisfied, you need the cutoff to be low enough, but low enough not just as low as maybe a few orders of magnitude smaller than the Planck scale, is actually parametrically lower than the Planck scale, really compounded by the mass of the electron and its charge itself. So this is a dramatically low scale in our grand scheme of things. It's 10 to the 15 electron volt. Okay, you may think this is quite large compared to the electron mass, but it's really small in a picture of quantum gravity. This is extremely small. You're saying that effects from quantum gravity, if you're considering these Paul subtracted positivity bounds, have to kick in at 3 orders of magnitude beyond LHC scale. So this would be amazing. I mean, if you could see kind of quantum gravity effect at 10 to the 15 electron volt, this is definitely an avenue you should work at, or we should all work on. But of course, this was only applicable if we believed the improved positivity bounds while subtracting the T-channel pole coming from the gravitational exchange. And so either the conclusion of what I just presented is really that there should be such effect that come in at an extremely small scale. This is one possibility, but it's a very dramatic possibility. Or there's another possibility, which is maybe relevant for this community, where when I presented this type of diagram and only included up to M Planck square corrected diagrams, contributions, it is possible that including higher order contributions, when they go like M Planck to the 4, those ones could dominate over these ones. Typically, you'd expect those ones to be suppressed, but if you have enough fields coming in at high energy, they will, if you have n field coming in at high energy, they will contribute at low energy with a factor of n, and if you have enough of them, the effect from those correction could counterbalance the ones from there. In principle, this is a logical possibility, but for this to happen, you would need to have such a large number of species to come in and to make sure that the higher M Planck suppressed effect compensate over the lower dimensional one. And so that would tell you that actually the mass of the particle, the electron in here or any other U1 you're considering, has to be larger than the Planck scale in units of the number of species. And now you see that the issue is in here that this M Planck over square root n is actually nothing other than the effective cutoff that comes in when you from the species bound. And so you really have, if E is 1 over 137, you have a very small window of opportunity where this could happen. So again, this is a logical possibility, but it would be in complete tension with the typical weak gravity conjecture that we would like to prove. And so we're left with a third logical possibility that the T-channel pole really does affect the applicability of these positivity bounds, and we have to allow ourselves to have some small amount of negativity in those bounds as soon as we're dealing with a gravitational effective field theory. And this is very relevant when dealing with the weak gravity conjecture, or trying to prove the weak gravity conjecture from those positivity constraints, because the level of negativity of the amplitude is precisely what would counterbalance the proof of the weak gravity conjecture. I have to highlight a very nice paper that came in very recently, which seems to being consistent with this last conclusion, where they're able to deal with this T-channel pole by instead considering finite impact parameter, and then they see indeed that the positivity bounds are allowed to be a little bit negative in the gravitational setup. So if we take this third avenue into account, and that's what I'm going to be following for the probably no time that I have left, at least in the case of QED, the very presence of gravity tells you, at least when M Planck is finite, that the coefficient of the amplitudes, which otherwise would typically need to be positive in a non-gravitational setup, can now be ever so slightly negative. And this negative effect is actually very relevant when dealing with the weak gravity conjecture, for instance. Okay, so Do you have some time left, or am I running out of time?
I think, well, now it's exactly 30 minutes, so it's not too bad. If you can have a couple more minutes for sure. Yeah.
Okay. So I'll go very quickly. I'll just show the punchline then. Thank you. Okay, so maybe one last thing I can say, and then I'm going to go through the details there, is I was making this story, or I'm not making a story. This is a very well-known story. It's kind of anchored since birth, that any level of superluminality is related to a causality. This is something we kind of have intrinsic inside us as soon as we're dealing with a Lorentz invariant effective field theory, which is really what we're doing in here. And so this is definitely true in a non-gravitational effective field theory. But as I mentioned, the connection is really coming through the positivity bounds. Of course, it's not really typically proven through the positivity bounds, but it's exactly the same. This is really where everything is coming from. So now in a gravitational effective field theory, I just said that we don't need to have those strict positivity bounds. There's a little bit of margin in the amount of negativity that we can be. And so that translates into an amount of superluminality that we can allow for ourselves in a gravitational effective field theory. So let me, this was well known to occur in QED on curved space-time, and it's of course related to the slight violation of positivity bounds there that I mentioned. It's been shown by Hollowood and Shaw in this beautiful series of papers, how at high energy there's no violation of causality, but it has been very challenging to explain how at low energy, or how the absence of causality violation can manifest itself at low energy. And understanding that is very important for us in segregating between different types of effective field theory, because sometimes, most of the time, we don't know the partial or full high energy completion. And so we often base ourselves on a strict level of subliminality as a consistency requirement, when in reality, this is not always necessary in a gravitational effective field theory. So I'm gonna skip the details in here. I'm happy to talk more about that later, but to cut a long story short, just the fact that you're allowed to have a small amount of negativity in a gravitational effective field theory for what would otherwise be positivity bounds, that tells you that you also have allowed to have a small amount of superluminality in a low energy effective field theory. This is completely independent of frame, artifact, or anything like that, right? I'm not dealing with that here. But you're allowed to have a small amount of superluminality so long as it goes sufficiently quickly to zero when you send back the Planck scale to infinity. So this is really a gravitational effect, and it's really coming from the T-channel pole. And we were able to show how just looking at things within the low energy effective field theory, there's no violation of causality. And so just to finish on a picture slide, this is to promote how important those type of bounds and priors are in trying to constrain low energy effective field theory. So this is just an example for a particular simple, probably naive, but still simple and illustrative example of a dark energy effective field theory, which has some specific parameters, coupling constant in it, CB, CM, CT. They roughly parameterize the way the dark energy field couples with itself and with the tensors. It doesn't matter too much. But depending on the type of priors, for instance, if you put on yourself a subluminality prior, it will tell you that the data has to be within this purple region. Whereas if you put yourself some positivity priors, which I will argue are much more motivated and much more consistent with causality, actually, you end up with a completely different region of parameter space. And so this is to motivate the use of proper priors when constraining effective field theories in general. Okay, so I'll stop here. And just to summarize, while positivity bounds are strict in a non-gravitational effective field theory and are directly related to a set of assumptions that we can impose on ourselves at high energy, within a gravitational effective field theory, there's a violation of, there could be a violation of those bounds, which are typically witnessed in a standard natural partial EFT, like QED minimally coupled to gravity. And the allowed level of negativity that you can have on those positivity bounds is precisely relevant for the weak gravity conjecture, because it's exactly at that window of interest. Even though, of course, it goes to zero when you send the Planck scale back to infinity. And then this is more a connection with superluminality. The very presence of negativity in the positivity bounds allows you to have a small minor level of superluminality, or what you would otherwise qualify as a level of superluminality in a gravitational effective field theory, so long, of course, that it goes back to zero when you send the Planck scale to infinity. So I'll finish here. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much for the talk. It was really very, very interesting. So I'm sure there were many questions. So let me see who, I think it keeps track. Okay. So Sarah, do you want to ask that?
Yeah, thank you. Hi, Claudia. Thank you for a great talk. Quick question about other higher derivative operators. So you didn't include, so there could be other 4 derivative operators that are coming in. Do you have a feel for whether that would change the result qualitatively as opposed to quantitatively?
You mean for the story about QED or for the story without gravity?
Oh, no, I'm talking about the QED model. So
yes. So this is really abound on the cutoff, right? So we had originally, we had an argument where we're looking at different type of operators that would come in, and one by one we eliminate every single operator that we can think of. But of course we can't think an infinite number of operators. So then we're left with our conclusion at that stage. But this argument we have here is, I would say, much more powerful, because we completely agnostic on the type of operators that would come in and save the day. This is really telling you up to when can you trust this computation of the low energy loops. And then as soon as you violate this bound, as soon as the cutoff, if this cutoff was larger, then you would violate this bound. So it tells you that you really need to introduce operators, no matter how they are. They can be higher derivatives, they can be anything different at that scale. So you can introduce higher operators and they will save you, they will save the day, but you need to introduce them at the very least at that scale.
Okay.
I don't know if that answers your question, or if you have.
Yeah, no, it does. Thank you.
Yeah, so it's completely agnostic to what happens. You can have, so what happens at that scale, it could be there are new operators that came in that you hadn't accounted for in your, I guess I never written it down because I thought, sorry, I thought it was obvious. But so here I have QED minimally coupled to gravity. And I don't include any other operator. So what can happen at the scale lambda is that new operators can come in, or really you have new fields that come in. It's kind of the same. You have something else beyond QED minimally coupled to gravity that has to come in at the very least at the scale lambda in that picture.
Yeah, I understood your argument. Thank you. That's good.
Very good. So I think I have Miguel next on my list. But
yeah, so I just wanted to ask, so very nice talk. So sometimes, so I think in string examples, sometimes the magnetic weak gravity cutoff doesn't necessarily signify the breakdown or effective field theory, right? So you could have things like when you're close to a conifold point, there's a state which has a mass at g times some Planck, but you can just integrate it in because there's just one state, and you still have a reasonable effective field theory afterwards. So the cutoff that you have is, can you tell us something about what happens there? What is the cutoff after which you can no longer have an effective field theory description, or is it just that this?
No, you need something else. You need something else. So you need new physics to come in there. It would be, you can have an infinite number of layers of physics, and you integrate new fields one by one up to the Planck scale or whatever it is. But you need to have something there. So you can go and make a collider experiment, and you should be able to see something new going there for QED.
Right.
So,
you're saying
I mean, typically we don't scatter photons, but there has to be something. I can't tell you what it is, but there has to be a new field coming in at that scale, or the electron has to couple to the photon with new operators coming on that scale. I mean, it's a little bit, it's all the same, saying there's a new particle which you may have integrated out and its effect is coming in that scale, or saying that the electrons start coupling slightly differently. It's kind of saying the same thing. I'm going to remain a little bit agnostic on precisely what happens. There can be just one new particle there, and then once you reach that scale, you bring it back into the picture, you include this field into your description, and then you find up to a little bit longer. That's fine, but then I'm telling you, you make an experiment and you should be able to see a field at that scale, which is intrinsically dictated by gravity. So it's a little bit the same thing as the Higgs. We knew the Higgs had to be there, but of course not because of gravitational effect. Now I'm saying there's a new particle that has to come in, or there's a new effect that has to come in, which is gravitational, but it comes in at 10 to the 15 electron volt or lower.
Right. Right.
So I mean, to me, this is amazing, right? That would be beautiful. So I think it is so powerful that it's definitely an avenue I wouldn't close entirely. I'm focusing on the different, not on that option, but it is so impressive as a result that it's something maybe we should consider more seriously. It would be it would be nice, particularly that it is the way we can see in making the connection with the weak gravity conjecture.
Right. Just wanted to understand. Thanks.
All right. So Gabby.
Hi. So nice talk, Claudia. So I wanted to understand your view of whether this analyticity and unitarity bound are infrared constraints or UV constraints, because to me they seem to be the UV constraints. When you deform your contour at infinity, in principle, any arbitrary massive states would contribute. And in fact, in string theory, this is what happened. So the T-channel pole is solved by this tower of higher spin states. And so in the string theory context, it seems like the causality bound is not violated by a little bit, rather it stays the same, but the cure of the problem is it's having not only a finite number of particles, but having an infinite tower of states. And this is related to what Miguel was asking, because the magnetic weak gravity cutoff in string theory is the string scale.
So I'm not sure. I'm not sure how you. What is your precise question?
So my precise question is: a partial UV completion may not cut it, and you really have to know all the high energy states in your theory to make the argument about causality. I
mean that is very possible. I mean, in this framework, and we're just asking for that. So we don't really need to. I mean, I don't know if you want to question some of those assumptions and the way it's going to tend to infinity, or whether you want to question what happens at the cutoff. Because I mean, this is all within a weakly coupled UV completion.
Yes.
And all that happens is that some new physics has to come in, but within that bounds, you don't need even to know whether it's going to be one state or an infinite number of states. It doesn't matter.
Yeah. So I could ask more specifically. I could imagine a weakly coupled UV completion. The string coupling is weak. I have a tower of states that come in, and so the cure of the T-channel pole in the string theory context, weakly coupled string theory context, would be this tower of states that soften the UV behavior. So you satisfy the Froissart bound because instead of a single state, you have an infinite tower, and the UV behavior is much softer. So in that case, it seems like the right proposal to do is to drop the T-channel pole and run the argument with it.
I think even that I don't think I agree. Even even if you have an infinite tower state, this would be in that picture. This is not contradicting that picture.
No. So in the case of infinite tower, the sum of the amplitudes would be given by the Veneziano amplitude, which is bounded by S squared, straightly bounded by S squared.
Yes.
Right. So you satisfy the Frost-Hahn bound, and if you just truncate it to a finite number of them, you don't see this feature.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say is that what really will happen is that at the very least in this context, you have to allow yourself for that third option, for this thing here. So you satisfy the Frost-Hahn bound, the T-channel pole is there, but this is it manifests itself in a mild violation of this coefficient here.
So maybe I should ask you after the talk, because other people may want to ask questions. But I think, you know, my take on this is, in the string theory context, it's not adding another S squared contribution and make it smaller, but rather having an arbitrary high number of S to very high power contributions that sum over to give a soft UV behavior.
But this is part of the assumptions here.
No, I'm not making a statement in general. I don't know how to make the statement in general. I know in specific UV completion in string theory, that's how the S square behavior gets softened. And so that would be a situation that lies outside this inequality that you wrote down in this slide.
I mean, yeah, I'm not sure it will change this. I mean, in some cases, it will manifest itself in such a way that this is satisfied, but it's also satisfied by being positive, and I'm not disputing that. But I'm saying generically, you can't prevent, unless you make very specific assumption more than just weakly coupled, but you make very specific assumption on the realization at high energy, you cannot prevent from this happening in principle. So I think what you want to say is, if you have a tree-level weakly coupled completion, but that has to be the case. I mean, it will never be the case for QED, right?
So all I wanted to say is that this relation may not be general, and I know specific completion that this is not the solution.
Yeah, and but you would need. So when I'm in that picture. Sorry. When I'm in that picture, it requires me knowing that at every stage, it's always a particular, not only weakly coupled, but tree-level weakly coupled completion that occurs for every partial thing. So QED simply doesn't respect that.
I'm not questioning about QED. I'm just asking more generally about what is the right thing to do for causality bound, you know, to cure this T-channel singularity. But as I said, we should really take this offline, because I think I'm distracting the discussion to a direction.
I think there's a Slack channel that is a very good place for you to carry on this discussion. Of the Swampland program. So I think it is in the links on the website, maybe. So maybe we are running quite short on time, so we should maybe continue this offline.
Yeah, we can definitely talk more.
Okay. Lars, do you have a quick question? Or
yeah, I can make it quick. So okay. Thanks for a nice talk. I was just wondering, because you showed that there can be like the small negativity you sort of associate with having like a small amount of superluminal propagation. So sort of from the geometric picture, what's now the correct way to think about causality? Because as you said, even though there's superluminal propagation, you still expect these theories to be causal.
Yes, yeah. So I can go through the slides I skipped. Very good. So this has been this has been really the puzzle for I would say, quite a long time. And there's no question that for QED, for instance, Hollowwood and Shaw have shown very nicely how there's no violation of causality at high energy. The speed goes back to 1 at high energy. This mild violation of superluminality is simply a low energy feature. But we still need to understand how it manifests itself at low energy. And so I think this is what you have in mind as a picture, right? You have a low energy photon and you are in a curved background. As soon as they're in a curved background, they're allowed to propagate faster than the high energy photons. This is really the key. It's really the superluminal with respect to their high energy counterpart. And so as soon as you have that, then you have propagation outside of the light cone of the high energy photons. And then it just takes a little bit of imagination to build your time machine or something like that. So the key thing is that you have this propagation outside the light cone, or you think so, but you have a trade-off between the amount of support outside the light cone you can have and remaining within the regime of validity of your EFT. Because if you send in photons of too high frequency, then you were no longer allowed to use this low energy EFT. So clearly in this context, if you're sending in photons which have a frequency larger than the electron mass, then you're not allowed to be working with the Euler-Heisenberg picture. You have to bring the electron back into the game. So when you look at the amount of support you can have for yourself outside the light cone, what you would call the light cone, this is very symbolic. We have all the details in the paper, but roughly whatever configuration you're interested in, whether it's cosmology or black holes or anything else, whatever bulb of curvature you have in there, you will end up the amount of support outside the light cone is related to the amount of curvature that you went through. But at the same time, you want to remain within the regime of validity of the EFT, which tells you that contractions like that have to be smaller than the electron mass, for instance. And so that tells you again, unsurprisingly, there's a limit on high frequency modes you can send in, not only related to the cutoff of the EFT, but also related to the background, to the curvature. And so that tells you that the wavelength or the frequency has to be smaller than the curvature per se. So the amount of support outside the light cone that you can have for yourself has to be smaller than the wavelength of the modes that you're sending in. Otherwise, you weren't able to trust your low energy EFT to make that computation in the first place. So the gist of it is that it's simply unresolvable. And then once you know that it's unresolvable, then you know you can do things perturbatively. And if you start with your retarded propagator, your retarded gain function as being the same as the one at high frequency, and you compute the low energy one perturbatively around the high energy one, you can't have anything else than precisely the same light cone structure than your high energy one. And so you have no violation of causality.
Yeah, so it's really something that only appears in the EFT.
Okay, but we should stop it now because it's really, we're running way too long now. So thank you for the discussions, everyone. So